Pursuing godliness is really about doing the things that please God. Fortunately for us, we have a perfect example of what that kind of life looks like in the life of Jesus. Welcome to Run with Horses. My name is Norman. I'm joined by my wife Susan, and our goal is to help you thrive as a follower of Jesus. The spiritual life is simple in many ways, but it's potentially the most difficult part of your life. God invites you to grow, to live intentionally, and to join Him in His mission. It's very cool that we can do that together. And today, we're thinking about that aspect of pursuing godliness and His work in our life. And that is something that requires community, so it really is cool that we can do that together. If you're new, you can find out past shows. You can listen to past shows at runwithhorses.net or wherever you listen to podcasts. We always do appreciate your feedback, any questions you have, and do leave a review. It helps other people to find us. Well, today we're thinking about pursuing godliness, and particularly the idea that Jesus is our ultimate example of what that is. He's an example in a lot of different areas, but when we think about pursuing godliness and pursuing the will of God in our lives, He lived that perfectly. He perfectly glorified God. He accomplished the Father's will in His life, so He is that ultimate example of pursuing godliness for us. So, do you remember this would have been earlier in your Christian walk, but when you first realized that Jesus really is to be an example, not just He's the Savior? I don't remember when I first heard that, but I don't think it was early in my Christian life.
Probably not. Yeah, it's probably later.
I think for some of us, it can be easy to miss that. We constantly think about Him as our Savior because we recognize the sin in our life, that's an ongoing struggle. We recognize on a daily basis we need His forgiveness, so we focus on, or it's easy to focus on Him as Savior. But when we think about the Christian life and this journey of pursuing God's will for our life and obedience to Him and becoming, through this process of sanctification that He's working in us, more like Jesus, it's easy to overlook Him as an example and just look at our failures and look at ourselves, where we become really the center of our pursuit of godliness, where even in this, He's not just the center of salvation, He's not just the head of the church, He is at the center of our pursuit of godliness. And I think that's an important thing to remember if we're really going to pursue Him. So godliness is not really an abstract concept. It's something to be lived out concretely in our life. And one way you can see that is how it was lived out concretely in the life of Jesus. So I probably will say this again, but the best way really to become more familiar with that example of Jesus is to spend time in the Gospels and look at how Jesus lived. Look at what He taught. Look at how He interacted with people. What did it look like in a concrete way for Jesus to walk this earth and accomplish what God the Father had for Him? It's important for us to recognize that He did concrete things. He spoke to people. He helped people. He lived out godliness. So it's not just an abstract attitude or emotion. I think sometimes we can feel like, I feel good about myself right now, so I'm doing okay, and that's good enough. But that's not concrete. I think Jesus really lived this concretely, and the Christian walk is meant to be lived in a concrete way. So ultimately, to pursue Christ-likeness is to strive to live like Jesus, with His goals, with His attitudes, with His concern for people, and all of those things. And how do you get that? You just have to spend time in the Gospels. And then the rest of the New Testament gives you what the early church understood and how they lived out that, having seen and heard about His example firsthand. So just a reminder as we think about this idea of pursuing godliness, 1 Timothy 4, we looked at that early on several weeks ago when we considered pursuing godliness. We talked about exercising yourself toward godliness. It's profitable. It's worth effort. And so many of things in life, we would like them to come easy, but they don't.
And fast.
Yes. We would like them today, and we'd like them to be easy and free.
Yeah.
Not many things in life are like that. Godliness is one of those things that's worth every bit of effort you can put into it. It's very worth it. We should pursue a life that exhibits this fruit of the Spirit. We're living, reflecting the work of Jesus in our life. John 14:9 says, "He who has seen me has seen the Father." So just one last encouragement. Really look at Jesus. If you see who Jesus is, you understand what he taught and what he was doing. He was giving us a glimpse of God, of the Father, of what he's concerned about on the world and how he wanted to accomplish it. So I think all of that is wrapped up in there. So Jesus didn't merely teach about godliness. He lived it. He revealed it through his life and choices. His character, his conversations show us what a life fully pleasing to God looks like. So I think that's super valuable because it's easy for us to go, I'm not really sure what we're talking about. Well, let's look to Jesus. How do I act like him? I'm not God. I can't read people's mind. I can't do miracles, but I can love people. I can care for them. I can look at what God the Father is doing in the world and try to join him in that. And you see, running through all this, that Jesus was with people. He called out people to live this with. So godliness, ultimately, as we pursue that Christ-likeness and the goal of being like Jesus, it requires us to be in a relationship with other people, both lost and part of his church. This was one last just reminder. Godliness, it's not about rule keeping. It's not just do you follow these rules perfectly, but that's impossible. But it is about our heart. So it's more than your attitudes, but it's not less than your actions. So they are connected, but we can have the right attitude and not really be obedient, but we can also follow the rules and not have the right heart. I think both of those are errors. So relational obedience really comes out of a heart to please God, to love him, to see him glorified. And I think that's what kind of should drive us in all this. Any comments, thoughts?
Well, this may be heading off a different direction, but I was just going to ask, is there a time or situation or something you're facing that helps you or causes you to think and compare your life to Jesus, like to look at Jesus as the example? Is there something that instigates that, I'm handling this way, but Jesus would have, something else? Is there something like that? Do you know what I'm asking?
I kind of feel like every interaction with people gives us an opportunity to consider, because Jesus met all kinds of people. He met people who tormented him. He met people who loved him and adored him. And he met people who didn't know him, and only later. I mean, he healed, which one was it? The guy who told him to get up his bed and walk. Wasn't it him that he didn't know who Jesus was until later? I think that's the right one. So he met all different kinds of people in different contexts. From the Samaritan woman at the well to Nicodemus coming at night, to kind of wanting to hide that he even had any kind of knowledge of him. So Jesus had all these relationships. And to me, when I think about any relationship, one thing that can be helpful is to think about, is there a relationship similar to this that there is an example of? There's not always, or at least it's not clear, but I can at least ask that question, because sometimes there is. This person doesn't like me. okay, well, Jesus had a lot of relationships with people who didn't like him. So how did he act? How did he respond to that? I think that's the first question. The other one is not having a clear example, knowing Jesus's goals, his mindset, his compassion, his attitudes. What would he want me to do or be or say in this relationship? What most closely reflects what I understand the character of Christ and the desires and the will of God in this situation? And that's hard. We don't always have time or we don't always take the time to evaluate our relationships like that, but particularly the ones that are important or where it comes up, like, I'm not sure what to do. It's a really good time to do that. That does answer a lot of those questions. It doesn't make it easy to do what we see. And the problem with us as humans is, and I know I've had this, and it's kind of, I wouldn't say it's sin, but it's probably is a failure to really pursue godliness in that context. There's times when I've looked at a relationship and I say, I really think this is probably what should happen, but man, I don't know that I can do that. And that's probably a weakness on my part, or immaturity, or, some lack spiritually, or, there's all kind of issues wrapped up in that. But even recognizing that this is what I should do can be helpful. And sometimes I can rise to the occasion, and other times I fail and go, well, I recognize that I still need to grow. And then I think that's where the grace of God comes in, and it's not all about me in this other person's life, where in the New Testament, when Jesus met people, they're meeting God. This is all about Jesus in their life. For me, it's not all about me. It is all about Jesus, and he has other ways of even using my failures and mistakes to accomplish what he's doing. But to me, that's helpful. And it doesn't take long most of the time. I mean, sometimes there are complicated situations that it's not clear. But a lot of times, if I just say, what is the goal, as I understand it, of God in this situation, and how would, in my pursuit of godliness, in my pursuit of the character of Christ, how is the best way for me to live in a way that promotes the goal that God has of reconciliation with himself and of peace and unity? All those things come in. So depending on that's why it's hard sometimes. Sometimes, peace overrides. Maybe I want to push a different one of God's goal, but it might lead to disunity or disharmony or lack of peace. And to figure out what exactly do I need to do here, because I think Jesus accomplished all those, and it's not always clear to us how to do that. I'm not sure if that helps, but
yeah, I was thinking for me, there's certain situations like when it's a time of sacrifice that's asked for, or a time of suffering, or a time of surrender. Those times are times that I tend to turn to that Hebrews 12, 1 through 3 and 4, and just say, look, Jesus suffered way more than I ever will, and how did he do that? And he was able to look ahead to the future and endure the race set before him. And, I haven't suffered to the point of shedding blood. And those things help me to remember and look to Jesus as an example.
Yeah, and that's a couple of those things are things that we don't like to consider, whether it's the idea of enduring. I have to endure this. Yeah. We don't want to endure it. We want it to go away. Or the idea of humility. Well, we don't want to have to be humble.
Doesn't taste good.
Right. We don't want to have to sacrifice. And we may be willing to, but or at least I can do it grudgingly. It's like, well, does that count? If you're grudgingly going to do the right thing. And that's where we get back to the heart issues. Like, I can do the right thing and recognize that I need to be working on myself here.
I think when you look at Jesus and you compare, suffering or sacrifice or surrender, it's reminding you about life. Why are we here? And the temporal versus eternal, because he was all about, this is the Father's will. He knew exactly what his purpose was, and he was very, confident and clear on that. And it's not always that way for me. So sometimes I just need that reminder that, hey, I don't really want to surrender right here. I don't want to sacrifice in this way. But really, if you look at eternity, what is this little choice that I'm facing? Or this is only temporary.
When maybe this is getting off track, but it's not. It's related to pursuing godliness. Our bigger purpose is clear. I mean, it is the same as when Jesus walked this earth, was to glorify God and to point people to Him and be that vehicle of reconciliation. And the problem is where He knew exactly how He was going to do that. He was headed from the beginning toward the cross. We don't see that path completely. Mm-hmm. And that's what we really struggle with. It's kind of like when He said, Abraham, go where I will show you. Jesus knew where He was going. And we're more like Abraham and less like Jesus. We don't know where He's going to take us, but we know that whatever path He takes us on, our intention should be to glorify Him. I want God to look good in what I do. I want Jesus to be glorified. So my attitude matters, my effort matters, but my path, I think to a large extent, matters less. I don't have any control over that. And I have some choices. God does give me choices at times, but He also shuts doors. And if we're dedicated to a certain path, then we get upset. But God's going like, no, this is one of the ways that you glorify me, is through accepting my will. Mm-hmm. That can be hard for us. I know it's very relevant to us now as we're thinking about our future and how we go forward. But the purpose is clear. And what happens, I think, and this is maybe my tendency, maybe not everybody's, but is to be distracted by the immediate, and you can lose sight of the big picture. Because if you have that, then you say, okay, here's a temporary problem that needs to be figured out, but the big picture is the same. I need to glorify God as I undo this puzzle. God has given me a path to take, a puzzle to put together, and sometimes it feels like I'm missing pieces. Okay, well, how do I glorify God in this context? This is our life is the context God has given us to glorify Him. It's the same as some people, they're born with handicaps. What does that mean? They can't accomplish God's will? They have a different path than other people. It's harder in many ways. Well, that's their context. They still have to accept that ultimately their purpose is the same. Mm-hmm. The way that it's carried out is different. And that's what happens to us when we have big change in our life. God's saying, okay, and maybe a good way to look at it is, okay, you've glorified me in this context. Can you also glorify me in this one? And then it's another challenge. Mm-hmm. Can I put my heart right when I was attached to that context? But God says, like, no, that's temporary. Mm-hmm. Keep your eyes on the eternal. Mm-hmm. And even the next context, that's also temporary. Keep your eyes on the eternal. How do you glorify God in this context? And I think if we can keep our eyes on that, that's a big part of pursuing godliness. We're pursuing the heart of God in all that we do. Whatever path that is, whatever direction He takes us, whatever difficulties come, it's not about the difficulty. He can take that away or make it harder. That's irrelevant. It's not about which path. He can close off doors. He can open doors. It's more about, in my living out of the life and challenges that I have, which are different than the life and challenges that someone else has, am I putting God and His will, His glory first? And how do I do that in a changing environment, in a context that changes, in times of duress, in times when everything's going great? Mm-hmm. I still have that same goal. And if we can capture that and keep us, I think it helps us a lot. But it's really hard not to be distracted when things change, because we're people. We don't like change.
Yeah, and you start looking at the problems or the changes that you don't like, and you can become obsessed with those and have your focus on that instead of looking and keeping your mind full of God and what He's doing and searching to please Him, like you said. And I think in those changes, if you take a moment to think and process, I guess, you do find out, that was my identity back there. It had become my identity, and it's supposed to be God or who I am in Christ. That is my identity. And sometimes, as we change, we're forced to say, well, why is this hurting me so much inside? Or why am I struggling to face this? Lots of people have pain or suffering, and why am I struggling like this? And it points out some lack or a place that we need to grow or be more surrendered to God. And so it's a great chance to work on some of those inner workings.
Yeah. And that's often how God brings those things to our mind. You think, if I didn't face that, I wouldn't have known that I had that place where I really wasn't surrendered to God, or where I held on to that, and it was too much of my identity, and Jesus wasn't enough. Mm-hmm. So I needed that challenge or that change that I didn't really want, but God was using it. Mm-hmm. And then we can be thankful for it. And I think that's ultimately what Paul keeps saying. Rejoice in everything. Rejoice in every situation. Rejoice always. How do you do that? Well, you recognize that God's in it. Mm-hmm. That even the worst circumstance, situation that you can imagine, there are ways that God uses that in your life, in other people's lives, in His eternal plan that are worth it. Mm-hmm. The question is, are we looking for them? Do we see those? And sometimes we don't know what God's doing. Mm-hmm. But why is faith one of our big words that we really keep coming back to? Mm-hmm. That's where you say, I know who God is, and I know what He said, and He's never lied yet.
Yeah, it's very trustworthy.
Yeah. So I don't see right now what He's doing in this, but it's very much like what happened when our first child died. You say, well, what's important right now? Well, our faith is in God. What's important is who He is. Because our faith is weak, and we have lots of issues, but we're trusting in God. And we've said that, God, we believe what you said. And that time to go back and reconsider again, who is God? Is He worthy of our faith? And be reminded that He is. Mm-hmm. That allows us then to go forward in confidence that, and the way we put it is, one day if we stand before God and still we want to say, God, we really want to know what you did because our child died. How was that part of your plan? And when He explains to us all that was accomplished through that we'll go, wow. Mm-hmm. Wow, that was not just that was okay. Like we give permission, well, that was okay. We will agree with God that was the best thing that could have happened for the glory of God and for His eternal plan. The issue is we don't know that. So do we trust God? In our pursuit of godliness, that's often the issue, is are we trusting Him with our path? Are we trusting Him with today's difficulty? And it can be difficult. But that's where, again, the life of Jesus gives a good example, because He lived a difficult life, at least the last few years, and He died a horrible death. But it was worth it. It certainly was worth it to me. So when I look at His life, I have that example of someone who put his life in the hands of God the Father and said, I'll follow you wherever you lead, whatever it cost. So we're going to take a break and we'll be right back, and we'll continue looking at the pursuit of godliness and the example of Jesus.
Hi, I'm Susan. Welcome to the Caregiver's Corner. 2 different people recommended a good book for Christian caregivers, so I finally bought it. Even the first chapter has been convicting to me, so if you have the chance, I too recommend the book named Making Good Return by Kathleen B. Nielsen. I haven't finished the whole book yet, but I'm learning about honoring and respecting our parents even as they lose their filters, have bodily limitations and changes, and at times act like children. How do we maintain their dignity and lift them up when they're going downhill like this? And what does this look like practically in my life? So here are just a few thoughts. When I speak of my mom to others, I want to keep shameful things to myself. I won't divulge her bathroom blunders, for instance, her social faux pas, her embarrassing to her mistakes. When others see my mom after my sharing too much, they may be swayed to think less of her or look at her in a different light. Maybe I will be too. Would I like it if someone shared my moment of horror? I want to work hard at being patient with my mom, whether it's in listening or trying to follow her train of thought, helping her find words or filling in the blanks, or waiting for her to finish up in the bathroom. I can build in extra time, start the process earlier, in order to be able to leave on a time. I will sit down and relax a little to truly hear what she's saying, and in those ways I can be respecting her. I can smile at the jokes she tells, even if I don't really find them humorous. Another time. I will be gracious when she mixes up details or asks the same question 5 times in one day. That is really hard. I don't know why that's so difficult, but it is. I would like to not demand a perfect retelling of an event, but allow my mom to share her story as she desires without jumping in to correct her, which is also very difficult for me. I want to work at being kind to her at all times. When I'm feeling extra impatient and unkind, I want to call in reinforcements, maybe phone a friend, text a prayer warrior, beg God for help. I may need to lower my expectations of what I hope to accomplish that day. Also, I would like to seek to understand her emotions behind the words she uses, reinterpreting negative statements to see the underlying fears, the anxieties, the frustration, and the anger. I learned that concept from another book called Creating Moments of Joy, which I also recommend. When my mom is upset at something, it might not be the issue she's talking about, but it might be that she's just afraid of something coming up, and this is how it's coming out. As much as possible, I would like to promptly do the things that she requests of me with a good attitude. So she says, please tape up the windows. It's getting cold. And we think, well, the windows are really pretty good. I'm not sure we really need to do that. But because I want to honor her and respect her, I will do that, even though I don't think it should be done. Being respectful. What does that look like for you? Sometimes it means working on heart attitudes. Maybe I just need to switch my priorities, or I could simply need a break from everything for a couple of hours to get a new lease on life. Find one area where you could grow in showing respect. We can work on that one area until you have some consistent victories. Then you can move on to the next area you see a need. It seems that showing respect to an older person requires a good measure of humility. That can be difficult to produce in ourselves, but that's why we need our Savior to keep transforming us.
Welcome back. We're still looking at pursuing godliness and the example of Jesus. And one of the things that we want to consider is his character, particularly when we consider how we should be striving to grow in our character. And I think that's one thing that's maybe hard for us to know how to apply any effort toward. It's like, how does your character change? Have you thought about that?
Well, I mean, I've heard, people say the little daily choices you make, turn into your character. So you're not really thinking about it, but by choosing carefully and the little choices, you end up having that character over time.
Yeah, I think the way I would put it is like to be intentional in the little things does develop a pattern of choice that does influence your character. So you think about the fruit of the Spirit even, and self-control, self-discipline is part of that. That's also a character trait that you can develop. I think the fruit of the Spirit is the result of growing in Christ likeness and the result of being surrendered to the Spirit's control. But it's also an example of a character trait that you can have. And to develop the character trait, when you intentionally make the little choices that require some discipline and you continue to do that, you kind of develop this pattern of, this is the kind of person I am. I do hard things. I do the right thing even when it's not always my first choice. And you become that kind of person over time. I think you can apply that to a lot of the character traits, and you see there are things you can do if you can be intentional about it. And the problem is, where it's hard for us to be intentional all the time. But you want to be considering, what kind of person do I want to be, and what choices does that person make?
I'd say, like a concrete example, when we first moved in with Mom, I was just, it was so hard to be patient, asking the same questions again, or just, her mothering, even though I'm, been on my own for 40, 50 years, and she's telling me how to wash the dishes or something. And it's like, trying to hold back my instant reactions, which are not godly. And so, it took a long time, and I'm still working on that, but those are those constant choices. And some days I do well, other days I just blow it again. But maybe that's an example of, it's like, I don't want to be that cranky person who's impatient and angry at an older person just because, they can't remember this, or they want to take care of me too much, or whatever. But to ask God, okay, I need to control this, and find verses that can help encourage me, and ask for prayer. Say, I know this day I'm already struggling. Somebody please pray for me, and asking for those reinforcements all help to work toward, gaining a victory more often than not in those areas.
Yeah. And even the earlier step is valuing that trait. And sometimes if you don't value it, you're probably never going to develop it.
Just say, that's just the way I am.
Right. But if you value that character trait, and then you begin to apply intentional choices, then you do have, particularly when you consider the work of the Spirit in your life and spiritual growth and all those things, you do have the potential of becoming more like that. But you have to value it first, and then you have to put in some intentional efforts. Good examples of places where Jesus lived a life and had attitudes that we want to embrace. Think about his compassion. I think that's a hard one for a lot of us. And the world today it seems like it's not set up for compassion very well. Everybody's busy. And what's valued is busyness and achievement yourself. And compassion is not about achieving yourself and being busy. It's a slower pace, because you kind of, in the same way we say you have to value a certain character trait and apply intentional effort, to have compassion, you have to see people. And if you're going too fast, then you don't see people. You don't have opportunities for conversations. You don't really get to know them. So compassion doesn't have time to work. And I think compassion is one of those things that does take a little time to work.
You may have to get off your agenda too, and slows everything else down.
And that's that busyness part. If the busyness drives you, if the agenda drives you, then there's not a lot of time for compassion. And that not having time for the compassion means that we don't love each other really the way that we could. I mean, not the feeling, but in practical ways, we don't love people. We don't care for them because we didn't have the compassion for them, because we didn't actually see them in the first place because we're busy. But Jesus, in his pursuit of God's will and plan and glory in his life, he was never detached from people. He saw them as they were, but he didn't leave them as they were. I mean, some people chose to go away unchanged, but he always offered them the choice. They always had the opportunity to respond to him and be changed by him. And he usually was the one initiating the action. Not always. You have the blind man yelling out, Son of David, have mercy on me. He was initiating. So there were people that initiated it, but often, the Samaritan woman at the well, Jesus initiated that interaction. He often saw people, had compassion on them, and then moved to act in love and compassion in their life. So the big words, and as I was looking through this week, I haven't thought about these words since probably seminary, but they have orthodoxy and orthopraxy. I should remember those.
Sounds like a disease.
So orthodoxy is our right belief, the things we believe. So we have somebody's orthodox in their theology. It means it's the right belief. It's the standard Christian belief. Orthopraxy is the actions, the living that goes along with it. So you can have orthodoxy, you can have correct Christian beliefs without having orthopraxy, without living a Christian life. But one thing that Jesus did, I think this is one of the ways that he was that perfect example. He perfectly knew and embodied truth, and he perfectly lived out truth. Where we struggle is even where we have good theology and we know the right thing to do, say, be, we don't do it consistently. There's a disconnect between what we believe and what we do. And that causes a tension in us where a lot of this conversation, as we've been going for several weeks now, thinking about pursuing godliness, I think where a lot of the tension is not in not understanding what it means to be Christ-like and how he lived, his goals, what God's doing in the world, all those things, they're not hidden. The problem is more in our actions, in our desire to actually do those things. So we know what Jesus said. We just don't want to do that. We know who God is, and we know his mission in the world of reconciliation and redemption. We know he's building his church, but we don't like his church. There have a lot of people that are mean in there. And we don't agree with them. We don't want to love them. We don't have compassion for them. We'd rather do something else. So our beliefs and our actions always produce this tension. And in that tension is a place where a lot of us have guilt, or we have turned away from the church because we expect other Christians to be better than we are and to live and act exactly right all the time. So there's a lot of conversations that you'll hear where people will say, well, I don't go to church. There's so many hypocrites there. There's so many Christians and they're not doing what God said. Correct. I think that is the reality of the Christian life, is that we all have this tension where we know however much we know, and no matter how little it is, we struggle to live out what we know. But we expect other people to do better than we do. And so then we avoid people or condemn them because they're not perfect. And it's easy to pass judgment and then to cause problems in the church because of other people without actually looking at our own heart. Say, am I actually pursuing godliness? Have I matched up what I understand and believe with my life? And I think when we examine that, I don't have time to worry about a lot of other people. And where they're not matching it up, other than I want to be helpful to them. I have my own life that needs help. I'm not going to condemn somebody else because I'm in the same boat. I'm struggling. Paul was struggling. He talked about that in Romans. So in this pursuing godliness, we have a perfect example of someone who believed and lived what they believe. And then our struggle is, do we understand what God said? Do we understand what Jesus taught? And then to what degree are we living it? And how can we match those up better? And that really is, in some ways, sums up this idea of pursuing godliness.
And really, it's as we are dealing with the other hypocrites in the church that we realize what some of those places we're not matching up with what we say we believe, because it's so easy to deceive yourself, and think that you're better than you really are. And sometimes those relationships will help bring to light, oh, I guess not.
Yeah, the one another's do a really good job of pointing out how far we fall short.
Yeah.
Say, love one another, pursue peace with one another, pursue unity with one another. Just take those three.
Yeah.
And that removes the ability to talk bad about other people, to criticize other people. I mean, there's so many things in our relationships that if those three actually, just those three, forget the rest of them, just those three really were at the forefront, it would change a lot of our relationships because it removes a lot of potential negative, because you can't do that and pursue peace. You can't talk about someone in that way and pursue unity. You can't do that and love them. But we struggle even with those, which, those are the big ones. So it's why pursuing godliness is an effort. It's not something you can just say, yeah, I'm just going to do that. I mean, it does take time. It takes effort. It takes carefully considering where we are and who we are and how God's drawing us to himself and the places that he wants us to change. So the next thing on my notes, it relates to all that. If you recognize I'm not doing well, one thing it takes is humility.
Right.
We need those other imperfect Christians in our life, and that can take humility because they come in with their own barbs and imperfections that can be hurtful. And rather than avoid that, God tells us to love them and to have compassion on them. And Jesus, again, perfectly modeled humility. You have John 13 when he washed the disciples' feet. He modeled serving others humbly, putting them above himself. His humility was intentional. It was part of who he was, but it is also a choice. He willingly took the role of a servant, even though he was tired, he was hungry, he was all the things that everyone else is. Even though he was Lord, he took that role of a servant. So his humility was intentional. I think ours has to be too. We have to plan to be humble, intend to serve other people, and that can be a challenge for us.
What's really neat too is that some other Christians have a really good example in some of these different places too. So you can kind of look at them and say, wow, that's a really humble person. And it helps put into perspective, like in today's sense, because, Jesus lived in a desert and those thousands of years ago. So sometimes you can't always, what does this look like today? But when you see other Christians living those characteristics, it helps put it, into more concrete terms for me too.
Yeah, that's one reason why we do need that community, the church community, so much. We need the barbs because they point out where we need to change and grow in our love and compassion, but we also have examples of people who have surrendered, and they are humbly serving others, and they are being an example to the best of their ability. As Paul said, follow me as I follow Christ. There are people who are doing that in the church. And if you avoid it because of the ones who are not, then you miss the example of the ones who are. And you need both, actually. You need those hard people in your life.
Yep.
So Jesus was submitted to the Father's will. He said in John 6:38, I've come not to do my own will, but to do the will of the one who sent me. John 8, I always do those things that please him. So I think one aspect of Jesus as our example is that he wasn't forced into submission. And sometimes we have that concept or idea of submission that you're forced. That's not what he's asking for. He chose to submit. He willingly laid down his life, and it flowed out of this perfect unity with God and unity with his purpose. And I think if we can grasp that's one reason why studying the New Testament and understanding what God's doing is important, because you need unity with his purpose. You need to embrace his purpose and understand it's worth it. The thing that God is doing is worth whatever it costs, in a way that Jesus said, not if this cup can be taken away from me, take it away, but not my will, but yours. I'd rather not do this, but your purpose is worth it, if this is the only way. And I think if we can get to that point where we understand his purpose and we agree, this is worth it, then we don't fight the need to submit. We don't fight the change God brings. understand what God's doing is worth it. We need that unity with his purpose. And Jesus modeled that. So again, his example was not forced submission, but a willing choice to put God's glory and his plan first, no matter how uncomfortable it made him.
Yeah, that not my will, but yours, that it really helped me when I remembered Psalm 37:4, delight yourself also in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. I focused on that a lot when I was single and waiting for a husband. And just that thought that, okay, I don't want this, maybe whatever God's bringing into my life or not bringing, but that my desires can change as I focus and delight on him and look to his purposes and desire that. I mean, God has to do that work in our hearts to change what we desire, but he is able to do that. And it's a kind of constant reaffirming, yes, surrender. I'll do whatever you want, Lord, whether it's to be married or not, or to do this or to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Garden of Gethsemane, when he prayed that, and then going to the cross, really emphasizes the cost of obedience. We would like for it to cost nothing and just to be fun. And often it is. I think God does gives us things that we enjoy. And I think even in the life of Jesus, I think if you look at what he did, particularly over his ministry years, he led a group of men to build a relationship together and taught them. They spent time together. I'm positive there was a lot of that was really enjoyable for them and for him. But it wasn't all. And particularly in his mind, it's never going away that this is going to the cross. It costs something. So being submitted to God's will doesn't mean you're not going to struggle. It doesn't mean you're not going to have a cost. But understanding his will and being united with his purpose helps us understand that it is worth it. It's a cost that God has calculated and determined is worth it. He doesn't ask you ever to pay a cost that's not worth it. And that, again, goes back to faith. How do you know that? Well, I believe in who God is. I believe he is loving and kind. But he also has certain standards, and there's, he is all of his characteristics all the time. So faith is required, but I do believe that he's not going to ask me in the same way that he didn't ask Jesus to surrender something that wasn't worth it. Now, if Jesus went to the cross and no one was redeemed, that wouldn't have been worth it.
Right.
So pursuing godliness means trusting God, even when the obedience is painful. And that's a hard one for us. We don't want it to be painful. We don't like discomfort.
But again, when you look at, when I look at persecuted Christians in other parts of the world, that is inspiring to me too, because I think, I'm belly aching about this little, I have to give up this or give up that. And it's that is nothing compared to, I'm going to be in jail for 3 years because I held a Bible. It's whoa, put everything in perspective when you see things like that.
Yeah, in Philippians 2, says, let this mind be in you, which also in Christ. He humbled himself and became obedient to the point of death, even the death on the cross. So he was ultimately surrendered. And the question is, how willing am I to be obedient and really embrace God and give him control of my life? Thinking about this, and Mark 10 says, 10:45, for even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life a ransom for many. We understand Jesus' obedience was costly. We also need to understand godliness is not about self-preservation. It's not about me working myself to perfection and safety and all those things. It is a giving of self. If we model the life of Jesus, it is about, we see he gave his life for this eternal plan of God. In our life, it's really no different. God is asking us to give our lives for his eternal plan as well as part of his church. And that's not comfortable for us to think about because we have the temptations of the world and all of the things that people say that you should pursue are almost always in direct opposition to what God's doing. They pull you away from the pursuit of homes and cars and wealth and security, safety, all of those things, comfort. They conflict with a life surrendered to the mission and to the life of someone who's fully surrendered, because they are a pursuit of, I'm taking care of myself, rather than saying, right, God's eternal plan is worth being uncomfortable, being insecure, being not necessarily safe, and trusting that he will take care of me to the degree I need to be taken care of until he calls me home. And that's a hard one for us.
Yeah, because, I mean, it makes sense that if we have money today, we should be saving it up for when we're old. And yet sometimes God says, let's give that all away, or he'll take it away and say, now what? And then what are you going to do?
Trusting in.
Yeah. Also, this just popped into my head, but you were saying it's not self-preservation, but it's also not, godliness is not self-glorification. It's not just that I'm trying to make the best version of myself and the goal is just so, hey, look at me, I'm such a great person, or to prove to myself that I can do my best job and I can stop failing. It's not about that either.
It's not struggle for the sake of struggle. Some people just like to suffer, and it becomes about the suffering. And in some ways, there's pride in there, and that I'm able to suffer through this. It's not about that either.
Right.
It really is about, what does God call me to, and then I want to do that well, and draw attention to him, not to myself.
Right.
So again, we think about the example of Jesus. Well, his atoning work is unique. We can't do that. But his pattern of sacrifice is something that should be imitated. His pattern of humility. So, as we think about closing, 1 Peter 2:21 says, Christ also suffered for us, leaving us an example that you should follow his steps. I mean, that's pretty clear. It's hard for us to read the Gospels and then look at our life. And at least it's hard for me. It's like I just am not... the sacrifices that the New Testament Christians gave are not being demanded of me. What is? And am I willing to give that? How are we following his example? In what way is my life modeling these characteristics? And I think we don't ask that question, it's very unlikely that we're really going to be in the ballpark. An example has to be recognized, identified, and followed. Well, here, the Bible identifies the example. 1 John 2:6 also says, he who says he abides in him ought himself also to walk just as he walked. Again, the idea of, when it talks about walk in the New Testament, it's often talking about your life. So we should live just as he lived. We should have the same desires, the same goals, that ultimate big picture goal of glorifying God and seeing his purpose achieved. So if we're not identifying that example, we're probably not following that example. So, we're saved by the work that Jesus did through his sacrificial atonement on the cross. But we're also, moment by moment, being shaped into his likeness by some of the fruit of that work on the cross. We have received the Holy Spirit, which continues to draw us to himself. We have his example, and as we follow him, he's working in us and shaping us. Godliness, it's It's not meant to be optional for us. It's meant to be the evidence of a life that's new. Well, we need to close today. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the show, you can listen to all the past shows wherever you listen to podcasts. A good place to start is runwithhorses.net. You can write me at norman@runwithhorses.net. Ask a question, leave a comment, whatever you do. Continue to pursue Jesus and don't stop running.
Caring for another human is a huge responsibility, and often we do it all by ourselves. I'd like to propose to you another way. How many Christian caregivers do you know? How wonderful would it be if you and some fellow Christian caregivers met even just once a month, online or in person, to go through the Bible book of Ruth? Before I became a caregiver, I had never considered that Ruth was a successful caregiver. But I have come up with a book called The Redeemed Caregiver to help share with others this journey. You can dig into Ruth in a new way, with room to jot down answers to specific questions, as well as times to share your experience and thoughts with others. Maybe you think, I can't start a Bible study, but this is an easy option for anyone to use. It's a time of sharing, and prayer requests and answered prayer can also be added, making it a huge encouragement to all involved. So look up The Redeemed Caregiver by Susan Jane Smith. You can look on Amazon.com. And my prayer is for Christian caregivers to meet together and share the journey.